Ink on the Rhine. Written by Stefan Richter. Narrated by Charlotte Baker. For Marie, even if I can't be in your life, I'm glad I had the greatest of pleasure to know you. Prologue.
Stop daydreaming, Kian. You can stare at Alice as long as you want when the class is over, barked old Mrs. Fisher with her deep, authoritative voice, slamming her ruler on the desk. The class burst into laughter, and several guys started to point their fingers at Kian. Lucas, Alice's boyfriend, couldn't hide his anger and was white-knuckling the side of his desk. "The freak dies today after school," he whispered to Nils, the second in command of their pack. Nils turned around and winked. "After school," he whispered to other young thugs, and grinned in an anticipation of giving a good beating later. The laughter rolled through the classroom when the thugs realised they'd have a toy to play with that evening. "Kian, are you listening to me?" Mrs. Fisher's face became red and her voice turned into a high-pitched scream. She slammed her ruler on the desk over and over again, harder with every hit. "Are you listening to me?" The scene made the class laugh even louder, and soon the only thing they could hear was a cacophony of laughter, shouts and hitting sounds. Kian was sitting calmly and looking at Alice. The view had him completely hypnotised, and not a single muscle moved in his face. Why does everyone say she's beautiful when she's so ugly? What do they see in her that I don't see? He squeezed his eyes a bit and then relaxed them again. His face was neutral, showing neither disgust nor pleasure, maybe only a little curiosity. She's empty and the light is buried so deep inside her, I can barely see it. Her ugliness should be considered a disease to be treated, but yet it's praised instead. I don't understand it. "Kian!" Furious from being ignored, Mrs. Fisher grabbed his shoulder and turned him around. Her face was crimson red, sweat dripping down her chin, bloodshot eyes locked on the boy. Kian slowly raised his head and looked directly in Mrs. Fisher's eyes, still no expression on his face. She wanted to shout at him again but stopped herself, and for several long seconds they were just staring at each other, saying nothing. It looked like Kian's reaction, or better yet, the lack of it, stunned Mrs. Fisher. The piercing black eyes studied her like a biologist studied wildlife, emotionless, distant and unattached. Mrs. Fisher was standing aghast, goosebumps running up her back. Finally, without saying a word, she slowly turned around and started to shuffle back to her desk, whispering to herself, "What the hell is wrong with you, boy? What the hell is wrong with you?" The bell rang. Everybody instantly forgot about what had just happened as they cheerfully rushed home. Kian was slowly putting textbooks into his briefcase, wasting as much time as he possibly could, waiting until everyone was gone so he could walk home alone. Alice cast a disdainful glance at him, while Nils dragged Lucas out of the classroom. Lucas's eyes remained fixed with intense hatred, staring straight at Kian the entire time. Lucas repeated, "I'm going to kill him today, I'm going to kill him." Alice smirked and turned to her friend. Without trying to hide her excitement, she whispered, "The evening's going to be fun." Both girls headed to the exit. Kian waited a little bit more and looked around the empty classroom. Everyone was gone except for the unofficial queen of the school, Linnea, a girl with long hair as white as snow, big cold blue eyes, and an exquisite, elvish-looking face. She was top of the class, the captain of the local equestrian team, and host of a popular in-school party she gave every month. Teachers adored her, and most of the school thought she was cool because of her style and the parties she threw. However, admiration was not the only feeling she provoked in people. They called her the Snow Queen, with overtones of fear in their voices. Linnea was active in order to get into a good college. Being so goal-oriented, she was fierce and had no mercy for anyone who dared to waste her time. Lucas learned it the hard way when he tried to hit on her several months earlier. "Hey babe, let's hang out after school," he said, with an ever-present smirk on his face. She paused and looked at him with her crystal blue eyes, amused that he even dared to approach her, and in a polite tone, she slowly answered, "Though humbled, a lion will not play with the pig." Lucas didn't understand the answer, but he got that it was a no. The day after, he gave her several dirty looks and was talking trash about her to Nils and the rest of the gang. She noticed it, but did not confront him publicly. The next day, however, Lucas was surprisingly quiet and didn't say a word about her. When Nils opened his mouth to make a dirty remark when Linnea was passing them by, Lucas punched him in the chest and said, "Shut up." The words sifted through his teeth as he looked down like a beaten dog. While nobody commented on it, everybody did notice, and from this moment the Snow Queen was feared even more. No one had any idea how she managed to tame the biggest bully in school, which only strengthened her reputation through the tall tales people started to tell each other. "I heard she beat him in the alley. I heard she blackmailed him. I heard she hired someone to kidnap him." The teenagers had good imaginations, and everyone had a story to tell. That made Linnea look even cooler in their eyes, cementing her position at the very top of the local social ladder. She was unreachable and lonely. No one dared to talk to her, but no one was worth talking to either, except for Kian. They had only a few opportunities to chat, but she remembered every single conversation with him. One day, they were at a party, when in the middle of the conversation he suddenly said, "Follow me." He turned around and started to walk away. Startled, she had no choice but to go after him through the cheerful and drunk crowd, holding glasses of expensive wine, whiskey, and in some cases, wine mixed with whiskey. "Linnea! Hey, how are you? You look great today." Being alone in that moment, she was immediately bombarded with meaningless questions and comments. People are so brave after several glasses of wine. She had to make her way through using a polite, weaponized smile coupled with quick and courteous replies. She tried not to lose sight of Kian, but had to slow down and look away to say hi to Alice. When she looked back, Kian was gone. Confused, she was trying to find him in the crowd again, when suddenly a hand grasped her wrist and gently but firmly pulled her in the direction of a black door at the back of the room. "This way." Linnea surrendered to his assertive, unattached voice and let his hand guide her through the room. She had no idea where the door led to, even though she'd been renting the place quite often. She really liked the spacious studio apartment, but was renting it for the sole reason of having parties there, so she never bothered to get to know it better. It was already perfect as it was. The minimalistic and classy design matched Linnea's personality, and huge floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view on one of the best neighborhoods in town. At night, one could see stars above and the myriad of smaller stars lining the streets below. Being so high up in the sky, sometimes Linnea felt not only royal as an unofficial queen of the school, but also divine. Kian opened the door and they started to run up narrow dark stairs. Linnea was looking at his back and skipping through the steps in order to keep pace with him. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed a sign. "Danger. Roof access. Authorized personnel only." He opened the door to the roof and they went outside. "Isn't it supposed to be closed?" she asked, hiding excitement behind her calm and unimpressed voice. He didn't answer and only looked at her, smiled and continued to move toward the edge of the roof. Linnea felt the wind gently touching her face. She took a deep breath of fresh, after-the-rain air and looked at the tiny people walking below. Each person was carrying their own tremendous baggage with them. Tragic, happy, boring and exciting life stories. A man who had just cheated on his wife. A woman who got a promotion that day. An old man who just learned that his grandson died. A young couple who had fallen in love recently and spent all their time canoodling. Countless life stories, stories more exciting than Linnea's, walking down there and writing themselves at that very moment. They were stories that Linnea would never learn, from people Linnea would never meet. A police siren cut through the soothing hum of the night traffic and woke Linnea from her trance. She looked at the sky above and couldn't see anything but a pitch-black void above them. As I was saying, Kian tried to continue the conversation downstairs as if nothing had happened, but he quickly noticed the semi-meditative state Linnea was in and stopped. She was clenching the cold metal railing, breathing slowly and deeply, feeling the wind in her hair. Looking up,
She was mesmerised by the full moon peeking out through the clouds. Kian placed his hand on the railing so that the side of his hand touched hers slightly, and he looked up too. The cold from the railing mixed with the warmth of Kian's hand and caused the blood to rush to Linnea's face. They stood there in silence for a solid couple of minutes, enjoying a rare moment of peace. The clouds were gone, and the full moon illuminated the sky, almost blinding Linnea. She squinted her eyes, but didn't even think of looking away. She was lost in her thoughts, and the variety of overwhelming sensations all fighting for her immediate attention. He touched her chin and slowly turned her head toward him. "You're the only light," he said, making eye contact. Linnea gasped for air and felt her heart pounding hard. She looked back at him with her mouth slightly ajar and tried to make sense of the combination of his words and his usual distant facial expression. His dark eyes were staring directly at her, showing no interest or any emotional investment in the moment. It was like he was observing the moment instead of living it. She felt an urge to touch Kian to get at least something out of him as she involuntarily raised her hand toward him, but he suddenly moved to the exit and disappeared into the stairway, leaving her standing flabbergasted on the roof. "I'm the only light." Standing in the empty classroom, she caught herself being confused again. Why was he staring at Alice? Is she also the light, whatever it means? Was there some other reason? In any case, Linnea thought that Lucas wouldn't be able to ignore Kian this time if he wanted to save face. He tried to bully Kian a long time ago, thinking it would be an easy job since Kian was an outsider and a lone wolf. But it didn't work as expected. Just as with Linnea, no one knew exactly what happened, but somehow Kian received an immunity and was never touched or threatened again by Lucas or his gang. This time, however, they had to act. It doesn't matter how bad a hungry dog is beaten, it will still bite you should you try to take a bone from it, even if the bone is old and tasteless like Alice. Linnea knew Kian felt her worried gaze on his back, but he decided not to turn around and instead closed his briefcase and left the room in silence. The sun was setting and it coloured the evening red outside. Kian looked at dormant trees on the side of the road and at yellow leaves covering the ground. He took one of the leaves and moved down a narrow alley leading to the park near the school. He'd take the alley, go through the park, and in 15 minutes he'd be back home. He had almost crossed the alley when Lucas stepped out of the shadow and blocked his way. With a greasy smile, he started to play with a butterfly knife in his hand. "So, you like Alice now?" Two huge figures appeared behind Kian. He heard Nils chuckling behind him on the right. "You think I let you hit on my girl in front of everyone? You think I let a freak like you humiliate me in front of everyone?" Kian didn't change his facial expression and took a step forward, showing that he wasn't interested in conversation. Expecting to see fear and not indifference, Lucas angrily grasped Kian's shoulder and shouted, "I'm talking to you!" Nils tilted his head and was watching the show with a relaxed smile. He just wanted to have fun and wished he could punch Kian without all that unnecessary talking Lucas liked so much. "What's the point? You're only doing it to see fear in their eyes, and Kian shows none, so let's skip the boring part already." "You insult me," Lucas paused, "and Alice, by just looking at her." Kian sighed, looked back at Lucas, and started to talk slowly and calmly, still unattached, like a doctor giving a diagnosis to a patient. "I don't care about her. There's nothing but dust there. Maybe later she can change. There's always hope. But right now, she's nothing, which makes the two of you the perfect match." "Yes, we are the perfect match," Lucas smiled triumphantly. Kian couldn't help but roll his eyes as Nils shouted behind his back, "He said she's nothing, and you are the perfect match. He's telling you you're nothing, idiot." A couple of students heard the cries and went into the alley to investigate what was going on. Soon there were more and more people in the alley forming and closing a circle around Kian, Lucas, and Nils. None of the spectators wanted the show to end badly, but all of them hoped for it. They believed they were good people, but from time to time someone had to be sacrificed for the sake of adding action into a dull life. And a loner is always the best choice, since no one mourns the loner. One of the goons stepped back into the crowd and started to chant, "Fight! Fight! Fight!" A couple of weak voices nearby joined him, and soon everyone was chanting in unison, even those who didn't want to. Kian felt the darkness closing up on them. Everyone has the light in them, he thought, looking at their faces in the crowd. Stop for a second and think for yourself, he said assertively. He saw a few people stopping chanting in hesitation, and a glimpse of revelation crossed their faces. A little brighter now, said Kian to himself, and smiled.
Nils started to lose his patience and couldn't take the ridiculous show anymore, especially when Lucas was being such a moron. He stepped closer to Kian and punched him hard in the region of the right kidney. Kian blacked out for a split second and fell on his knee. The crowd cheered in glee. I'm nothing. Lucas finally realised that Kian didn't take him seriously, and suddenly, when everyone was watching them, his reputation was at stake. He folded the knife, put it in his back pocket, and punched Kian in the face.
The crowd cheered again, and Kian noticed how a couple of girls turned their faces away, poorly faking disgust and pretending to disapprove of what was going on, but still peeking at the show.
This is so wrong! Stop them, Sean!
Said one of the girls to her boyfriend, tightly holding his arm and anchoring him to where he was standing. Kian touched his lip and enjoyed the metallic taste of blood. Homo homini monstrum. He slowly looked around at the crowd, still no emotion on his face, and couldn't make out a single person anymore. Everyone blended into a faceless, inertial mass, controlled not by heart or brain, but rather by the never-ending quest of the animalistic need for excitement. At least they had something to talk about tomorrow, and Kian was the main character in this meaningless play. His vision became blurry. He heard another, "Fight!" and turned his head toward the voice. It was Alice, standing in the front row, but he could only see a dark, formless figure in the place where she should have been standing. A gloomy, pulsating silhouette was erupting the rays of blackness like the sun erupting its flares. Was he dreaming, or did the punch damage his eyes? Curious, he tried to focus on the figure and the rays around it, but that only made Lucas angrier.
Are you kidding me? You're staring at her again right now! He cried,
frozen with anger. Nils took that as another good opportunity to join this conversation again and punched Kian in the ear. Instead of the expected cry, shout, or at least a plea to stop it, he heard, "Black. You're black too."
I think he's going crazy.
Nils smirked and looked at Alice, who was smiling and clenching her friend's arm in excitement. For the first time in his life, Kian looked confused. He was accustomed to seeing the light in people. Some of them, like Linnea, even sparkled. But the darkness was completely new. The black void that was supposed to be Alice, the one that should be Nils, another one that used to be Lucas. Slowly and steadily, everyone was being replaced with a blob of nothingness. With every cheer, with every hit. "There's the light in everyone, there's the light in everyone," he started to whisper quietly, rubbing his eyes. They just lost their way. The audience didn't like the pause, and someone from the back threw a plastic bottle and hit Kian, either intentionally or accidentally. "Fight!" Kian closed his eyes and opened them again. He looked in the distance, hoping that it might help him to clear his vision. There was a glimpse of hope when he saw Mrs. Fisher going to the parking lot. She saw the crowd, realised what was going on, looked at Kian, and quickly turned away to her car. Maybe that would teach him a lesson, she thought, and disappeared into the darkness like the other silhouettes. Lucas smelled the victory over the once powerful enemy he couldn't touch for so long. He smiled widely at Alice, looked at Mrs. Fisher driving away, at Nils locking Kian's arms, and eyeballed the crowd. They were like a heroin addict who needed a new shot of excitement. Another punch and the audience cheered in neurotic joy as everything went black for Kian. "Everyone has the light in them," he whispered for the last time. He made a fist and leaned on his forehead, feeling the rough pavement and how warm the blood was as it dripped down his face. He closed his eyes, took a second and opened them again, but everything stayed dark. He felt another hit from the side and scratched the road with his fingernails. Then another hit followed, and another one, and another one. He tried to cry "No!" but heard only a primal growl. He tried again with the same result. "There's the light, there's the light, there's..." He clenched his fist. "There's nothing." The punches were coming over and over again. 1, 2, 3. The spectators nearby started to count each blow.
Nils noticed that the situation was getting out of control and cried, "That's enough!" But Lucas only pushed him away and continued the beating. Nils looked at Kian and saw that his face changed. It was surprisingly relaxed now. Startled, he studied Kian further. Nils thought that something was different about him, but he couldn't pinpoint exactly what had changed. His body was stiff, his breath was slow and deep, and his shoulders proudly opened wide. Nils looked at Kian's arms and noticed the veins protruding as thick as a pencil and still getting bigger. The fingers jittering quickly, the back straightening out despite the blows. Nils took a step back as Kian stood up in front of Lucas, who was too high on adrenaline to notice anything around. Kian tilted his head and touched the edge of his lips with his tongue to taste blood again. His eyes were open, but he was lost in the darkness. "There's no light anymore. There's nothing," he said, in a low voice, and made a swift movement with his right hand. An arc of blood flew out from Lucas's chest through the air and splattered on Alice and her friend. The high-pitched cry broke Lucas from his adrenaline rush, and he slowly looked down at his chest. 4 deep cuts were going through it, as if he'd been attacked by a bear. Everyone went quiet except for the 2 girls who were still screaming, but now for a different reason. Nils took another step back and stumbled to one of the goons standing behind him. "Run," he whispered, but the goon was completely stunned and couldn't move an inch. "Run!" shouted Nils. "Run!" And the whole crowd scattered in panic. Linnea was slowly walking to her car when she heard screams in the alley and saw people fleeing with fear in their eyes. She threw her handbag and textbooks in the back seat of the car and rushed to the alley, bumping into people running away. "Run!" She heard Nils and felt him trying to pull her away from the alley. "Where's Kian?" she cried while fiercely trying to break out of his grip. Nils was out of breath and had to stop for a second to fill up his lungs. He paused again to find the proper words. "He's a monster!" Linnea looked at him outraged. "Oh, you're telling me this." She pushed Nils away and rushed into the alley. The sun had set and the alley was dimly lit by one broken, flickering lamppost. She felt her pulse racing when she saw 2 figures standing in the dark at the end of the alley. One of them was Lucas, facing her and standing there paralysed with a grimace of horror. The other figure stood with its back to Linnea. It was hanging over Lucas, making the muscular bully look small. The figure's shoulders were slowly going up and down with every breath she could hear even from the distance. Linnea paused for a second and took a step forward. The figure jerked its head, growled and sniffed the air. Lucas followed her with his eyes and shouted, "Don't move! I think it can't see, but it feels the movement." "There's no light," a familiar but deeper voice rumbled through the alley. "There's no light." The words became less and less distinguishable with each repetition, and now resembled more an animal roar than human speech. Linnea took another step forward and hesitantly asked, "Kian?" The figure sniffed the air again and quickly turned around with a long threatening growl, raising its arm up in the air with stiff curled fingers wide open. Blank and unfocused eyes, like that of a blind person, were staring into the nothingness. The arm jerked higher for a blow. "Kian?" Linnea softly whispered in a wobbly voice. His eyes started to refocus, and he saw a glimpse of Linnea's light breaking through the complete darkness. Too late.